The small, rundown spaceport on the fringe of known space had always been quiet, almost forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. Ethan Carter, a former soldier who had left his past behind, spent most of his days tinkering with old ships and mechanical parts. The planet was not a place for tourists or adventure, but to him, it was perfect a quiet life, far away from the chaos of the universe. But on one late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the orange sky turned to purple, the loud, sudden crash echoed across the barren land, followed by the smell of burning metal. Ethan's heart raced as he jumped to his feet, his mind already racing through the possibilities. A meteor? A ship crashing? Whatever it was close. He grabbed his tools, grabbed his jacket, and ran towards the source of the noise, his boots kicking up dust with every step. As he neared the crash site, he could see the wreckage of a small, unfamiliar ship, half buried in the sand. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek, with glowing lights that flickered weakly. The ship's hull was damaged, leaking strange fluids that shimmered under the fading sunlight. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He could hear the faint hum of a life support system struggling to stay operational. There was someone inside. Cautiously, he approached, his hand on the blaster at his side. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he couldn't just walk away. As he reached the wreckage, he pried open a panel, revealing a shattered window. The interior was dark, and he could see nothing at first. His heart raced, adrenaline pumping. Then, with a deep breath, he pushed the hatch open. Inside, barely conscious, was a woman. Her skin was a shade of violet that shimmered under the dim light. Her features were alien strange, yet beautiful. Her long, flowing hair, a deep shade of silver, was tangled and covered in blood. She was breathing shallowly, her chest rising and falling with effort. Her clothes were torn, and her body was bruised and battered from the crash. But what caught Ethan's attention the most were the faint signs of a pregnancy, her abdomen slightly swollen, indicating that she was carrying a child. Panic surged through him as he knelt beside her. "Hey, are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice rough with urgency, but she didn't respond. She was barely conscious. Sweat dripped down her forehead as she weakly opened her eyes, only for them to flutter closed again. Ethan's mind raced. What had he gotten himself into? The woman wasn't human. He had never seen a species like this before, and he had no idea what kind of trouble this might bring. But despite the confusion and fear gnawing at him, something about her situation, her vulnerability, her pregnancy struck a chord deep within him. He couldn't just leave her there to die. Taking a deep breath, Ethan began working quickly. He'd seen enough injuries to know that the woman needed immediate medical attention. He tore a piece of his own shirt to make a makeshift bandage and pressed it against her side to stem the bleeding. His mind worked in overdrive, piecing together his limited knowledge of alien species. There had to be something he could do to help. Minutes passed like hours. The woman remained unconscious, but her breathing became steadier. Ethan muttered to himself, trying to keep his nerves in check. "Come on, hang in there," he urged. He glanced back at the wrecked ship. The life support system was failing, and the ship was slowly sinking into the sand. It wasn't safe here, not for either of them. He had to get her out. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan managed to lift the woman into his arms. She was surprisingly light despite the pregnancy. Carefully, he carried her to his nearby workshop, which had once been a place for small repairs, but was now the closest shelter. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. He didn't know who this woman was or where she came from, but he knew he couldn't leave her to die alone in the desert. Inside the workshop, Ethan placed her gently on the workbench. His hands moved swiftly, doing what he could to clean and bandage the wounds. It was clear that she had been through something catastrophic. Her body showed signs of a violent struggle, and the injuries weren't just from the crash. Whoever or whatever had been chasing her hadn't given up easily. His thoughts raced as he worked, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. It took hours before the woman's breathing began to stabilize. Ethan stayed by her side, working through the night. His mind couldn't help but wonder what kind of alien race she was from. Her people had to be advanced. Her ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. But there was no time to think about that. His first priority was making sure she survived. ASA, the first light of morning crept through the workshop's windows. The woman stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly with an alien light. She looked around, confusion clouding her features, and then her gaze settled on Ethan. There was a moment of silence, a flicker of recognition, and then she spoke in a language that Ethan couldn't understand. Ethan froze, unsure of what to do. He had no translator device, and he certainly didn't know the language of this alien woman. But somehow, despite the language barrier, they communicated. Her eyes softened, and she managed a weak smile. Stay, she whispered, her voice soft yet full of a strange urgency. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure what she meant, but the look in her eyes was enough to convince him that she needed him, even if she couldn't explain why. He nodded slowly, though he felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Who was she? What had happened to her? And most importantly, who had she been running from? Before he could ask, the woman drifted back into unconsciousness, and Ethan knew it wasn't time to press her for answers. But one thing was certain, he had just become entangled in something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. As the hours passed, and the sun rose higher in the sky, Ethan found himself pacing the room, his mind racing. His thoughts kept returning to the same questions. Who was she? Why had she crashed on his planet? And why was she pregnant? The answers didn't come, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning of something much larger. Something dangerous. The sound of the woman's faint breathing pulled Ethan back to reality. He knew that no matter what happened next, he had to protect her. But what would that mean for him? And what kind of threats might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike? The crash had brought more than just an injured alien woman into his life. It had brought the unknown, and for better or worse, he was now part of it. Days turned into weeks as Ethan continued to care for the alien woman, whose name he had learned was Naira. She was slowly recovering, but the journey ahead was still uncertain. Every morning, he would check her vitals, and every night, he would stay by her side, wondering when, if ever, she would wake fully. Naira's injuries were severe, yet her alien physiology seemed to be stronger than anything he had encountered. She healed quickly, though there was still a distant sadness in her eyes whenever she regained consciousness. It was as if the trauma of what she had experienced haunted her, but she refused to speak of it. For the first few days, she didn't even acknowledge the pregnancy, but Ethan noticed the subtle changes in her, how she seemed to protect her abdomen whenever she moved, how she looked at it with a mixture of fear and hope. Her mysterious silence only deepened Ethan's curiosity, but he knew better than to press her. She had been through enough. Still, the more time he spent with her, the more questions piled up in his mind. He learned a few things about her people, the Zelvians, a race known for their technological prowess and advanced understanding of the universe. But she spoke little, often lost in thought. Naira's deep violet eyes would sometimes study him with a hint of trust, but just as quickly, that trust would retreat and a wall of wariness would form around her. Ethan couldn't blame her. After all, she was an alien, stranded on a foreign world with someone she didn't know. Her only company was a man who had no idea how to truly help her. It wasn't until the third week that Naira finally spoke. Ethan had been out repairing one of his old space cruisers, attempting to keep himself busy while Naira rested. When he returned to the workshop, he found her sitting up, her head turned toward the window. The soft light of the evening sun cast a long shadow across her face. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse but clear. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her gaze never leaving the horizon. "I am not your kind. You don't know me. I am nothing to you." Ethan stood frozen for a moment. He hadn't expected her to speak, let alone ask such a question. He set down his tools and walked over to her slowly. "Because you need help," he replied simply. His voice held no judgment or suspicion, just the honesty he had always carried. "And because I couldn't leave you out there to die." She turned her head, looking at him then. There was something deep in her eyes, a mix of gratitude and fear. "I am a stranger to you. My kind are enemies. They would destroy you if they found you." She paused, as if the weight of those words hung heavily in the air. "They will not stop until they have me. And my children. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Children? She'd mentioned nothing of children before, but it made sense now. Her swollen abdomen wasn't just a result of the crash. She was pregnant, and it was clear she was running from something or someone. Something much more dangerous than a simple crash landing. You're pregnant, Ethan said, though it wasn't a question. His voice was soft. Who's chasing you, Naira? What happened? Nira's eyes flashed with pain at the mention of her children. She looked away again, as though she could block out the memories. I don't know if I can trust you with this, she whispered. You are kind, but you do not understand. I was part of a peaceful race, but we were too trusting. We didn't prepare for the storm that was coming. The Varkath Syndicate, they want my children. They want our knowledge. They've been hunting us for years. I was only able to escape because I'm carrying twins, but I fear they will not let us live in peace. The name Varkath Syndicate sounded like something out of a bad horror movie, but Ethan could see the sincerity in her eyes. Whoever they were the real threat now, and they were coming for her and her unborn children. Ethan's heart sank as he thought about the situation they were in. They were alone, trapped on a planet no one would miss, with a wrecked ship and no way to contact anyone for help. The odds of survival were low, especially with an enemy as ruthless as the one Naira described. We need to move then, Ethan said, his tone serious. You're not safe here, and neither are the kids. We can't stay out in the open. Nira's gaze flickered with doubt. You don't understand. The Varkath Syndicate will find us anywhere we go. They have eyes in the sky, and they have resources I can't even begin to comprehend. They will track me, no matter where I hide. I was hoping to reach Zelvia. My people, but the ship was too damaged. Ethan's mind raced. Then we fix the ship. We get you and your children out of here. I don't care who's hunting you. If it's you and me against the universe, I'll fight. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimpse of real trust in her expression. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. She had been fighting her whole life to survive, and for the first time, she might have found someone willing to fight for her. Why would you risk everything for someone you don't know? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan paused, his hand resting on the workbench. Because it's the right thing to do. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a man who had seen too much destruction in his life to let it continue. He had walked away from war to find peace, but in that moment, he realized peace wasn't something he could just find, it was something he had to protect. Nira said nothing more, but her gaze lingered on him, filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. They both knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy. And whatever happened next, they would need each other. Days passed, and Ethan's life continued to revolve around the care of Naira. She was no longer unconscious, but her eyes still carried a distant, haunted look as she tried to regain her strength. Ethan was patient with her, understanding that the trauma she had experienced was more than just physical. Nira spoke little, often staring into space, as if reliving a nightmare she couldn't escape. Every day, Ethan would check on her, offer food and water, and try to keep her comfortable. In return, she would offer him small, fleeting moments of trust. She would allow him to touch her arm to check her vitals, and sometimes she would talk, though her words were often cryptic. She seemed reluctant to share much about herself, but Ethan didn't press her. He could see the fear in her eyes when she thought of the outside world. Something was chasing her, something that made her want to stay hidden. As the days passed, however, the tension in the air grew. Nira's situation had become more urgent. Ethan had come to realize that the real danger wasn't just her injuries, it was whoever was after her. She was a target, and the people chasing her wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. It wasn't until the end of the second week that Nira finally spoke of who was after her. Ethan had been tinkering with a broken ship in his workshop when he heard her soft voice behind him. They will find us. Her words made him freeze. He had been expecting it, but hearing it from her lips made it feel real. Slowly, he turned around to face her. She was sitting on the makeshift cot he had set up for her, her violet eyes watching him with a look of quiet desperation. Who? Ethan asked, unable to hide the concern in his voice. The Varkath Syndicate, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The name meant nothing to Ethan at first, but the gravity in her voice told him it was something dangerous. They're a ruthless group. They'll do whatever it takes to get what they want. And what they want is me and my children. The words struck Ethan like a punch to the gut. Children? He asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Naira nodded. I'm carrying twins. They're special. She looked away, as if struggling to find the right words. The Varkath Syndicate wants them. They want their abilities. My people, the Zelvians. We've been hiding for years, trying to avoid them. But now, they've found us. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to understand. Nira's people were clearly more advanced than humans. She had shown him glimpses of their technology during her recovery, things that were far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. But why would the Varkath Syndicate be after her children? The answer came too quickly. They were after power. How do they know you're here? Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. I wasn't the only one, Naira said, her eyes darkening. The ship I was traveling in wasn't the first one they attacked. We were part of a group, a small fleet of ships trying to escape. Some made it to safety, but others. She trailed off, her gaze distant. I don't know if anyone else survived. I barely made it out. The weight of her words hung in the air. She had escaped something catastrophic, and now she was alone, stranded on a planet with no way to escape the eyes that were searching for her. Ethan swallowed hard, realizing the magnitude of what she was telling him. He wasn't just protecting an injured woman anymore. He was protecting the last hope of an entire species, and that was a responsibility far greater than anything he had ever taken on. How much time do we have? He asked, his voice steady despite the fear building in his chest. Not much, Naira replied. The Varkath Syndicate has ways of tracking ships. They'll know that mine is missing soon. They'll come looking. Ethan's mind raced. He had no idea how to fight off a group like the Varkath Syndicate. He had experience in combat, sure, but nothing prepared him for this. He could barely defend himself against a single threat, let alone a whole organization. But the look in Naira's eyes, those eyes full of fear for her children, for her people, drove him to make a decision. We can't stay here, he said, his voice firm. We need to get you out of here. As soon as your ship's repaired, we leave. We find a way to get you to your people, to safety. Naira shook her head. It's not that simple. The Varkath Syndicate has spies everywhere. Even if we leave this planet, they'll be able to track us down. Ethan clenched his fists. Then we fight, he said, his voice growing more determined. We fight them together. Naira looked at him, her expression conflicted. You don't understand. I don't want to drag you into this. You don't know what they're capable of. Ethan stepped closer to her, his resolve unshaken. I'm already involved. And if they come for you, they'll have to come through me first. There was a long silence as Naira studied him. Finally, her shoulders slumped, as if a weight had been lifted from her. You're brave, she said softly. But this isn't a fight you can win. I've seen what they do to those who resist. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a seat next to her, trying to think of the best way forward. We don't have to win the whole fight, he said slowly. We just need to survive long enough to get you and the kids to safety. Naira's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of something hope, maybe shining in them. You would risk everything for us? She asked. Ethan nodded. I'm not letting them take you. Not without a fight. Naira stared at him for a long time, her gaze unreadable. Finally, she reached out and touched his arm, her fingers light against his skin. Thank you, she whispered. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ethan felt a small sense of relief, as if a barrier between them had finally started to crumble. She had trusted him with something deep, something precious, her children, her future, and now there was no going back. Whatever the Varkath Syndicate had planned, whatever danger lay ahead, Ethan knew one thing for sure. He would do whatever it took to protect Naira and her unborn children. He wasn't going to let them destroy everything he had come to care about. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, each moment more frantic than the last. Ethan and Naira worked side by side, repairing what was left of the wrecked ship she had arrived in. It wasn't easy. The ship had been heavily damaged in the crash, and even with Ethan's skills and Naira's alien knowledge, progress was slow. They had no time to waste, but every time Ethan thought they might be close, something else would go wrong. A system would fail, a power source would short out, or a vital component would be missing. But Naira was resourceful, and Ethan's persistence kept them both going. The hours stretched on, and the tension between them grew thicker with every passing minute. Naira's trust in Ethan was growing, but it wasn't without its struggles. The closer they got to finishing the repairs, the more she seemed to pull back, her fears growing deeper with each day. She had warned him countless times, "They will come, Ethan. The Varkath Syndicate doesn't give up. They will find us, no matter where we go." Despite her warnings, Ethan refused to back down. He had made a promise to protect her children, and he wasn't about to break it now. He knew there was no way they would ever be truly safe as long as they stayed on this planet. Their only hope lay in getting off-world, escaping to a place where the Syndicate's reach couldn't touch them. One evening, as they worked on the ship, Naira finally gave him a glimpse of the fear that had been consuming her. They had been silent for hours, focused on the task at hand, when Naira suddenly stopped, her hand trembling as she gripped the control panel. "We don't have much time," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "They're getting closer." Ethan looked up sharply, his pulse quickening. He had expected this moment to come, but now that it was here, it felt much more real. He rushed to her side, his hand resting on her shoulder. "How do you know?" Naira didn't answer at first. Instead, she turned her gaze to the sky through the open hatch of the ship. Her eyes narrowed, as if she could see something that Ethan couldn't. "I can feel them," she said softly. "They've already started searching this planet. They'll track the ship's energy signature. It won't be long before they find us." Ethan's chest tightened. "Then we have to move now." He grabbed his tools and began to close up the ship's maintenance hatch, his mind already working out the plan. "Everything's ready, Naira. We leave at dawn." But Naira's voice stopped him. "I can't just leave." She was shaking now, her grip tightening around the control panel as if she might shatter it with her fear. "I've already led them this far. If they find us, if they find me, she swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "They'll use my children. They'll use them to get to my people, to gain control of everything we know." Ethan turned back to her, his expression hardening. "We don't have a choice. You're not alone anymore. I'm with you, and we're getting off this planet together. They won't hurt you. They won't hurt your children." Naira's eyes flickered with doubt, but for the first time since their encounter, she didn't pull away. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice filled with a sorrow that made Ethan's heart ache. "I'm not just an individual to them. I'm a weapon, a key to their victory. If they get to me, everything I've worked to protect will be lost. You have no idea how far they'll go." "I know one thing," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of his resolve. "They won't get you. Not if I have anything to say about it." The rest of the night was a blur of frantic preparations. They worked tirelessly, Naira's alien expertise and Ethan's mechanical know-how combining to breathe life into the damaged ship. The hum of the engines, the steady click of tools, and the soft exchange of words filled the air as they pushed their limits to get the ship ready. But in the back of Ethan's mind, a storm was brewing. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Varkath Syndicate was already too close. Every movement felt like they were being watched. As dawn broke the next morning, the ship was finally ready. The sleek alien vessel gleamed under the first rays of sunlight, its once damaged body now seemingly whole again. Naira stood beside the ship, her expression unreadable, as Ethan made the final checks on the console. But as he prepared to board, a sudden, terrible noise shattered the calm, the unmistakable sound of blaster fire in the distance. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned to Naira. "They've found us." Without a word, Naira rushed toward the ship, her movements swift and purposeful. "We're not ready," she shouted, urgency lacing her voice. "We need to go now, before they lock onto the energy signature." Ethan followed her, fear gripping him, as he ran toward the cockpit. He didn't need to ask questions anymore. He knew they were out of time. He activated the ship's engines, the low hum of the power core filling the space. As the ship slowly began to lift off, the ground trembled beneath them. Ethan's eyes scanned the horizon, and then he saw them, the unmistakable silhouette of enemy ships descending from the sky. The Varkath Syndicate was here. "Hold on!" Ethan shouted as he threw the ship into full throttle, the powerful engines roaring to life. The ship shot into the sky, its sleek form cutting through the atmosphere with lightning speed. But as they ascended, the air around them crackled with energy, and Ethan could hear the whine of weapons charging. He gritted his teeth, his hands steady on the controls. They were being pursued, no doubt about it. "Can you shake them?" Nira asked, her voice tense but focused. "I'll try," Ethan replied, pushing the ship's throttle to its limits. He could feel the heat of the pursuing ships behind them, the fire from their blasters streaking past them in dangerous arcs. The Varkath Syndicate wouldn't let them go easily, not when they were so close. Nira gripped the side of her seat, her breath coming fast. She closed her eyes, murmuring something in her native language. Ethan glanced at her, confused, but he didn't have time to ask. "Hold tight," he said through clenched teeth. He veered the ship sharply, cutting through the clouds, twisting and turning to avoid the fire. The ship groaned under the strain, but it held together, its advanced technology holding the line. The chase seemed endless, but the moment the ship broke through the atmosphere and entered the void of space, Ethan's grip on the controls tightened, his body tense with adrenaline. But just as they thought they had escaped, Nira's voice cut through the tension. "They're still following us," she said, a tremor in her voice. Ethan glanced at the scanners. His stomach sank. The enemy ships were still on their tail, faster than he had hoped. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time since they had met, Ethan knew something deep in his bones. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to make sure Nira and her children survived, no matter what it took. The moment the ship entered the cold, empty expanse of space, Ethan felt a brief sense of relief. They were no longer on the planet, no longer at the mercy of the Varkath Syndicate's relentless pursuit. But the feeling was short-lived. The moment he checked the ship's scanners, the truth became painfully clear. The Syndicate wasn't done. They had followed them into space, and they were getting closer. Ethan's fingers flew over the controls, trying to calculate their best course of action. But the enemy ships were closing in fast, their engines unmistakable against the backdrop of the stars. He cursed under his breath. Even with the ship's superior speed and maneuverability, he didn't know how much longer they could outrun them. Nira stood beside him in the cockpit, her expression tense, her eyes darting between the scanners and the stars outside. The purple hue of her skin seemed even more vivid in the pale light of the distant stars. She had been silent for most of the flight, but now she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "We can't outrun them forever, Ethan. They have faster ships. They've been hunting us for years. They're experts in this kind of chase. And if they catch us, it won't just be me they take. It'll be my children, too. They'll..." She trailed off, and Ethan knew she didn't want to say the words out loud. He didn't need to hear them to understand the gravity of the situation. The Varkath Syndicate would do anything to get their hands on the children she carried, and if they caught up with them, it would mean the end for Nira's people, for her unborn twins, and perhaps for the fragile hope of peace in the galaxy. "Listen to me," Ethan said firmly, his eyes never leaving the scanners. "We're not going to let that happen. We'll find a way. We just need to think." He pressed a button on the control panel, activating the ship's stealth systems. A low hum vibrated through the ship as the energy signature began to dissipate. For a moment, the scanners showed no sign of the pursuing ships. Ethan breathed out slowly, trying to calm his nerves. "This will buy us some time. We can jump to another system. We're not out of the fight yet." Nira's gaze softened, but it was clear she was still unsure. "You don't know what they're capable of. They'll track us across the galaxy if they have to. They know things. They have technology that I don't care what they know, Ethan interrupted, his voice full of determination. We're not giving up. Nira fell silent, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to reach for something, perhaps a weapon, perhaps a sign of reassurance. Ethan could see the conflict in her eyes. Part of her still wanted to protect him from the truth, to shield him from the full scope of the threat they faced. But the other part was beginning to realize that Ethan was more than just a protector. He was now a partner in this fight, whether she liked it or not. Suddenly, the ship jolted violently, throwing Ethan forward into the control panel. He grunted in pain but quickly recovered. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, wiping the blood from his lip. The ship's alarms blared, and the scanners showed a new reading. A Varkath ship had fired a warning shot, a blast that had grazed the side of the ship, sending them into a spin. The Varkath weren't just pursuing them now, they were trying to disable them. "They're not playing around anymore," Ethan said, his eyes narrowing. He immediately adjusted the ship's trajectory, fighting to keep them steady. Nira's face was pale, but there was a fire in her eyes now. She could feel it too. The syndicate was closing in, and they had no time to lose. "We can't keep running," Nira said, her voice resolute. She stepped closer to Ethan, her eyes locked on his. "We need to fight back, Ethan. They'll keep coming until they have us. And I'm not letting them take my children." Ethan's hands tightened on the controls, his knuckles turning white. He had no doubt now that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting Nira and the twins, and he would do whatever it took to ensure they were safe. "Tell me what to do," he said. Nira's gaze flickered with something like hope, something he hadn't seen in her eyes until now. She reached for the ship's systems, her fingers dancing over the alien controls with surprising ease. The ship's weapons systems hummed to life, a low, pulsing sound reverberating through the metal hull. "I've been holding this back," she said, her voice steady now. "This ship isn't just a means of escape. It's a weapon. The Varkath Syndicate has never seen anything like it." Ethan's heart raced. He had known the ship was advanced, but he hadn't realized just how advanced. "You've been holding back?" he asked, his voice incredulous. Nira's lips curved into a rare, fleeting smile. "I had to make sure you were ready first. You didn't exactly seem like the type to jump into a battle without a plan." Ethan chuckled, despite the gravity of the situation. "And I guess now I'm ready." "Now," Nira said, her voice turning cold, her face hardening with a fierce determination, "we make them regret ever chasing us." She activated the weapons system, and the ship's energy shield flared to light. Ethan glanced at the readout, his eyes widening. The ship's weapons weren't just blasters. They were pulse cannons powerful enough to tear through a starfighter's hull in seconds. "We'll need to be quick," Nira said. "They'll be expecting us to run. But if we can hit them hard enough, we can make them reconsider." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. He quickly adjusted their course, bringing them face to face with the lead Varkath ship. It was a sleek, menacing vessel, far more advanced than any of the human ships Ethan had ever encountered. It loomed ahead, its weapons primed and ready. "Brace yourself," Nira warned, her hands steady on the controls. "We're going in." Ethan didn't hesitate. With a single command, he engaged the ship's weapons. The pulse cannons fired, sending a wave of destructive energy surging toward the Varkath ship. The blast struck the enemy ship's shields, causing them to flicker, but the ship didn't fall. Ethan cursed. "It's gonna take more than that." Nira didn't flinch. She made a series of rapid adjustments, her eyes focused, her lips set in a grim line. "I'm not done yet." Another pulse from the ship's weapons, and this time the Varkath ship's shields failed. The blast hit its hull with a resounding explosion, sending the enemy vessel spiraling away. But Nira knew this wasn't the end. The Varkath Syndicate didn't back down easily. And now they knew exactly who they were dealing with. Ethan exhaled sharply, his eyes scanning the empty space ahead. "That bought us some time. But not much." Nira turned toward him, her face calm despite the chaos. "We don't need much. We just need to get to a safe place. And fast." Ethan nodded. The chase was far from over. But for the first time since this nightmare began, He felt like they were finally fighting on equal footing. The Varkath Syndicate had made a mistake. They'd underestimated the strength of a human willing to fight for what was right. And now they would pay the price. The stars around them streaked past in a blur of light as Ethan and Naira pushed the ship to its limits. The Varkath Syndicate was relentless in their pursuit, their ships like shadows, always just behind them, closing in at every turn. Ethan's hands were white on the controls, his every instinct screaming for survival, for the safety of Naira and the unborn twins she carried. His thoughts raced as fast as the ship, trying to think of a way out, a way to escape this nightmare. But each passing second felt like a lifetime. Naira was silent beside him, her eyes fixed on the dark void ahead. She'd been quiet for the last few minutes, her lips pressed tightly together. Her earlier resolve had hardened into something colder, something unyielding. Ethan glanced at her. He could see the tension in her jaw, the way she clenched her fists against her knees. "You know they're not going to stop," he said, breaking the silence. "Not until they have you. Not until they have your children." Naira's gaze flickered to him, her face a mask of determination. "I know, but they don't understand how far I'm willing to go to protect them. They won't take my children. Not while I still breathe." The fire in her voice stirred something deep inside Ethan. He didn't just want to survive anymore. He wanted to end this, to take the fight to the Varkath, and ensure that Naira's people, her children, and their future were safe. He knew they had to do more than run. It was time to take a stand. Ethan brought the ship into a steep dive, dropping them out of the line of sight of the Varkath ships. "I've got an idea," he said, his voice filled with a new sense of purpose. "But it's risky. I'll need you to trust me." Naira's eyes narrowed, assessing him as if trying to gauge the sincerity in his voice. Then, after a long, tense moment, she nodded. "I trust you, Ethan. But I'm not going down without a fight." Ethan's heart raced. He couldn't afford to lose her trust now. This was their one shot. They couldn't keep running forever. He manipulated the controls, initiating a series of evasive maneuvers that would leave the Varkath ships trailing behind. The ship rocked and groaned as it banked hard to the left, twisting and turning in the vast expanse of space, weaving through asteroid fields and debris, making it almost impossible for the enemy to keep track of them. The only problem was, these maneuvers also drained power from the ship's engine's power they couldn't afford to lose. "Ethan," Naira called out, her voice tinged with urgency. "We can't keep this up forever. We need to get to a place where we can hide and plan our next move. They're going to catch up. It's only a matter of time." He didn't respond immediately, his focus entirely on the controls. The ship bucked again, as if it were alive, struggling to stay intact as they pushed it harder than it was designed for. "I know," he said after a beat, his voice tight. "I'm setting us up for a trap." "A trap?" Naira asked, her voice suddenly filled with skepticism. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Ethan glanced at her, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We don't have a choice. I'm going to lead them into a narrow passage. If I can get them to follow us into a magnetic field, I'll overload the ship's power core. It'll be enough to take out their shields and disable their weapons." Naira's eyes widened. "That's a suicide mission." "It's not if we're fast enough," Ethan replied. "We've got one shot. If they get through the trap, we're done." Naira considered this for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm with you. Let's make it count." With a final look at her, Ethan pulled the ship into another sharp dive, setting their course toward a narrow sector in the galaxy, a place filled with dense magnetic fields that would disrupt enemy sensors. As they approached, the ship shuddered under the strain of the power surge. The Varkath ships, relentless as ever, followed suit, diving into the narrow passage after them. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he lined up the shot. He could feel the sweat trickling down his back. Every nerve in his body was on edge. He had no room for error. One miscalculation, and it would all be over. The enemy ships were closing in. He could see the energy blasts from their weapons lighting up the blackness behind them, barely missing the ship's hull. The magnetic field was just ahead, and he was running out of time. "I'm ready," he said, his voice calm but filled with a focused intensity. "Now, Ethan," Naira said, her voice steady. Ethan slammed his hand down on the control panel, activating the ship's power core override. The ship's entire energy system surged, flooding the magnetic field with an intense pulse of energy. The field reacted instantly, sending out shockwaves of interference that began to scramble the Varkath ship's systems. The lead ship fired its blasters wildly, its aim lost as their weapons were disabled. The first Varkath ship collided with the magnetic field, sending an explosion of light and debris rippling through space. The other ships followed suit, crashing into the same field. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the ship rocked violently, the force of the explosions reverberating through the cockpit. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, the alarms began blaring warning lights, flashing red, the cockpit shaking as debris from the destroyed Varkath ships tumbled through space. The ship's energy reserves were critically low, but Ethan and Naira were alive. The Varkath were gone, scattered across the vastness of space, their fleet broken. "We did it," Naira said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at Ethan with a mix of awe and relief, the weight of everything that had happened finally starting to settle. Ethan let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping in exhaustion. "Yeah, we did." But there was no time to rest. The ship was damaged badly. The power core was barely holding together, and the engines were failing. Naira quickly began accessing the ship's systems, her fingers dancing over the alien controls. Ethan watched her, his heart swelling with pride. She was a fighter, and he would protect her, no matter what. "We're not out of the woods yet," she said, her brow furrowed as she worked. "But I know a place. A safe place, far from here. It's a system where the Varkath can't touch us." Ethan looked at her, the glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Lead the way." The two of them settled into an uneasy peace as the ship's systems hummed back to life. There were still many unknowns, still dangers to face, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt something akin to hope stir in his chest. He wasn't just running anymore. He was fighting for a future. And for the first time, the galaxy didn't feel so big and cold. It felt like it was finally within reach. A future where Nira, her children, and everyone she cared about could live in peace. It wasn't over yet. But they had won this battle. And that was enough to give them a fighting chance.